Well, good morning to all of you, my wellness family, and welcome to the Global Wellness Summit. You know, as I started to prepare my remarks for this morning, and hours of thoughts into less than 20 minutes, which is extraordinarily difficult, I reflected back on my first days in meeting Susie, a young, passionate, compassionate leader who was trying to put together an organization about a decade and a half ago, and she asked me to come and give a keynote address to this organization that was in its infancy. And I did in New York at a hotel in New York. And one of the things that I noticed at the time, contrasting my position as Surgeon General, here was a lady, a leader, who had a vision of what the world needed to be as it relates to health and wellness. Here is a woman that was crafting a global network of like-minded, passionate individuals. And I recognize that as Surgeon General of the United States, I had a great title and an important position, but I did not have a global distribution network for my content. To be able to unite the world around a common purpose, the passion of a world free of preventable disease. Because back then, Susie and I will tell you, there was no term wellness. We were really talking about prevention and the mounting disease and economic burden and challenges we were facing as a nation and a world, and how we needed to come together. That was a decade and a half ago. And so this immensely successful Global Wellness Summit and its institute, an overnight success in a decade and a half, Susie, because of your passion. A huge thanks to Susie, Nancy, and the team for their perseverance to get us together safely. And to the breakers, Paul Leone, Denise Bober, and many more. Literally a monumental global task in a COVID world, and at a time when we are all over-Zoomed and yearning for safe personal contact. Our global wellness theme, Resetting the World with Wellness, is a timely, much-needed value proposition to heal, to prevent further disease, to treat mind, body, and spirit challenges, and provide hope. Hope that we can all come together as a nation and a world. Hope that we can once again be human and greet each other with a hug, a kiss, a handshake, a high five. These actions and others are wellness force multipliers. And we are deficient in them now, and we hurt because of that. Hope that the malignancy of hyper-partisan politics will be defeated everywhere. Hope that not only as a nation, but as a world inextricably tied together, we see the good in people as we celebrate their diversity and as we strive to eliminate bias, prejudice, social and wellness injustice, and achieve health and wellness equity, and most importantly, optimize and democratize wellness for all. Hope is said not to be a strategy, but it is a most needed and desirable aspirational wellness goal. So let's look at the case that we can make for resetting the world with wellness. Some metrics that many of you are familiar with. And I would say that unfortunately they are representative of an unwell world. About 7.5 billion people share this very shrinking earth. About 2.2 billion do not have access to clean water. About 800 million people living on less than $2 a day, which exemplifies the term extreme poverty. And in extreme poverty, there is no wellness. You are surviving every day. 800 million people around the world. 500,000 children die from diarrheal disease globally every year. Things that in the developed world we don't think about much, but it is a disease burden that we all share. As my friend Louis said in that opening, very moving video, we are all interconnected. Every single thing we say and do has rippling effects across all societies and across the whole world. When we look at life expectancy in the developed world versus the third world, in the developed world, life expectancy sometimes is 2 times more than in the undeveloped world because of the lack of basic resources. We've come to term those the social determinants of health, a document produced by the World Health Organization a couple of decades ago, which talks about these social determinants because they are predictive of quantity and quality of life throughout the world. No matter where you are, these same precepts matter. Where you live, what resources you have. Do you have access to health care? Do you have access to recreation ability? Are you able to form strong, loving social relationships? Sometimes those simple things can't be done in many of these places in the world that are burdened with challenges that have them in a survival mode all the time. And as most of you know, a little stress is okay. It makes us better. We do better on our test. But stress every day, 7/24, is detrimental to our health and doesn't allow us to appreciate wellness. So as I look at the social determinants of health in our nation, and I just look in the United States, it is painful for me today that in some cases, a zip code determines your outcome in life. And that's still true in our country. The mental health needs of a nation and a world have dramatically increased because of COVID accelerating, isolation, and all these problems we talked about. But yet, these mental health needs have been imposed upon a nation and a world that are already deficient in mental health ability to connect to every person in our nation and the world. We also have the continued stigma and bias in mental health. As an old soldier, and many of my colleagues who I was in combat with still are fighting the wars in VA hospitals and in struggling and inability to integrate back to society. Suicide rates are high, divorce rates are high, depression rates are high, and yet it's tough for these people who have been given the privilege to serve us to raise their hand and say, I need help. It's overwhelming. I can't deal with these problems anymore. The death, the disability I see in combat. Yet, the culture has risen to the point where that shows weakness. And so we see this bias. We see the stigma that nobody's willing to come forth and say, help me, I'm struggling. Big problem, not only for us in our country, in the U.S., but globally, the stigma of that. And in the United States, of course, where Susie and I began this conversation a decade and a half ago, the only thing that's changed is the numbers have crept up. The fact is that we're spending almost $1 in $5 on health care in our country. And by the way, let's not fool ourselves. It is not health care. It's sick care. The fact is, most of what we spend our dollars on, which is about over $3 trillion a year now, that we call health care, are for problems that we cause by our bad behavioral choices. Being sedentary, obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, inability to make strong, loving, perpetual relationships that help us and strengthen us, that strengthen our immune systems. We're not doing it. And so we pay this burden. Political parties fight and blame each other, but they don't have the solution. The solution is within us. The solution is within a Global Wellness Summit and the Global Wellness Institute. That's where the rubber meets the road here. This group has that ability. Now, you add this to the COVID pandemic. First in over a century, 102 years to be exact, from 1918, devastating the world. 500 million were infected, 20 to 50 million were died. However, the institutional memory from that experience has been lost because we are repeating the same mistakes. If you go back and study history and what happened in 1918, they fought about masks, they fought about the economy, they fought about going back to work, they fought about social distancing, and you see what happened in the data. Yet we lost the institutional memory from a century ago. And how do I know that? Because today we have fragmented, politically driven, suboptimal approach to the pandemic. Hoarding of necessities, lockdowns, isolation, loss of life and opportunity, uncertainty, fear, rumors, conspiracy theories, anti-science, anti-vaccines. And besides the physical impact of all of this, the huge mental health impact of the anxiety and the stress of all of this imposed upon our nation and others that are struggling, especially because of the paucity of mental health resources being available. And all of this happening as our very democracy itself was being challenged. Think about all that stress that everybody goes through every day. So let's look at COVID by the numbers. In our global account, 50 million infected globally to date, approximately 1.3 million deaths, and daily cases are rising at 600,000 a day. And we look at the United States, approaching 10 million cases, about 240 million deaths, 240,000 deaths today, and 1,000 cases, 1,000 cases a day are accumulating in the United States. So this is a very significant challenge before us that, by the numbers, we have failed to get control for a whole host of reasons. Now add the plague of hyper-partisan politics to the baseline global wellness status and the deleterious additive effects of COVID, and you have the perfect anti-wellness storm that cries out for an antidote or a vaccine. We, the wellness world, led by the Global Wellness Summit, fueled by the Global Wellness Institute data, and empowered by all of you here and thousands globally digitally connecting today, are the antidote, the cure, the vaccine against a world of uncertainty, angst, anxiety, fear, and impairment. This can be dealt with wellness. Our collective wellness toolbox includes many elements that address all that ails us. These include, but let me, before I list them, mention something to you. The things I'm going to talk about today are what we used to be called complementary and alternative medicine. They are far from complementary. They are mainstream for the rest of the world. Unfortunately, the arrogance of Western medicine for a long time has dismissed these things. The fact is, we're finding out now with science, with our National Center for Complementary Integrative Medicine and so on, that these things work. There is actually a scientific basis for a lot of these things. So they're no longer alternative, and it's great that we are embracing them as tools that are additive to the great science we have to treat disease, but we can't afford to continue on the trajectory we are, waiting for people to get sick and then giving them the best treatment. We have to take them to a different place, a different journey where we're all interconnected to reduce the disease and economic burden. So when we look at these, the physical, simple things, keep moving throughout life because it affects mind, body, and spirit. Emotionally, find your peace, smile more, do things that evoke positive thoughts and decrease negative thoughts. Be a beacon of positive emotion. Be kind. God knows we have enough stress in the world and hateful rhetoric. Be kind to others. Socially, stay connected in meaningful, loving relationships. Get involved. Never retire from a vital life. Always have an aspirational bucket list and lead a purposeful life. Listen more, speak less. Spiritually, zone out daily in a comfortable mind space that you find. Contemplate often. If you have a religion, study it, practice it. Appreciate the natural world, trees, water, walk in a forest, swim in the ocean. Intellectually, learn throughout life. Never stop learning. Learning is the brain's gym. It prevents cerebral atrophy and cognitive decline. It fuels neuroplasticity, the growth of new nerves in that brain with memory that keep us vital throughout our life. Nobody wants to live longer than their mind. That's the biggest fear of seniors today. I'm going to outlive the mind and somebody has to care for me. It doesn't have to be that way if we understand the importance of being connected socially, of being connected intellectually, of learning throughout life. It's extraordinarily important. All these dots, the physical, the emotional, the social, the spiritual, the intellectual, inextricably tied together, they are force multipliers. They work synergistically with each other to make us better people, to make us healthier, to improve the quantity and quality of life. And it's all there before us for thousands of years. We're just reinventing the wheel now, quite frankly. We now know all of the aforementioned and other practices translate how the other practices and what I've just said translate into desired wellness outcomes. Just like we now know how our moms and grandmas were correct when they told us as kids to eat our greens, vegetables, and fruit, be nice, make friends, treat others like you would like to be treated, and go out and play. Now we can explain why mom and grandma were right, but I can explain it on a genetic and a molecular basis. because these are epigenetic inputs. These are things in the environment that our surveillance system, our genes, which are software packages that we are born with. You got 23 chromosomes from mom, 23 from dad, 46 make who you are. We grow up most of our life denying we're anything like our parents. And then at middle age, we go, damn, I'm just like them. Because you get that basic template of life from them. But here's the key. Because these are software packages, you get to code them throughout life. How do you code them and recode them? Based on the relationships, based on your spirituality, based on your exercise, based on all of the things I mentioned, these epigenetic effects code your genes throughout life. If you do the right things, your genes will work well for you. If you don't, they won't work well, and you will have problems. Cancer, heart disease, and all of these things. We now understand how all of these things come together scientifically. So, it's important that we make this commitment to look at what we used to call alternative, complementary, all of these buzzwords, because really they are mainstream. And our ancestors were a lot smarter than we were. Today we talk about farmers markets and people eating healthy. I remember as a kid and a child of immigrant parents my whole family only spoke Spanish when I was a little boy. We lived in Harlem in New York City, very poor. Went through homelessness, went through hunger, waited on long lines at public hospitals to get vaccines, to get cared for repeated pulmonary problems that were caused by roaches and mice in the apartment. But here's what I learned as I look back. Every Saturday morning, my grandmother would march me down on a bus to a place called La Marqueta, which was under the elevated subway in New York City, where Quonset huts, where all the immigrants shopped. And we would walk along, and we would pick up the food that she would be making the next day for all of her family and any of the immigrant families that were coming on the block. She became kind of the social worker there unofficially. And when we stopped to get the chickens, it was a live chicken whose head got cut off and put in a bag when the feathers were pulled and given to my grandmother. All of the food came out of a burlap sack for rice. The coffee beans were real coffee beans, not coffee. What was she doing? What looked like a farmer's market today. But what she was doing was eating farm to table. There were no preservatives. She never went to a store because that's the way her people grew up. That's the culture we had. And isn't it ironic that today we're going back to the future? We're creating our future based on these ancestral practices, which are the basis for our health and wellness. So we've come a long way. We are now recapturing this history that has made us the great world we are, and it escaped us because things started moving so fast that everything got processed. Food is coming from far away. You need monosodium glutamate and salt and preservatives and all that stuff. And we become sedentary. We're too busy to exercise. We're too busy to foster these loving personal relationships that we all rely on. But now we got to go back to the future, guys. We have the knowledge. We have the information to make this a better, safer, healthier world and bring us together. So in closing, I will say to you, for the first time in over a century, we have an infectious pandemic coupled with a mental health pandemic, and both exacerbated and or possibly partially caused by the plague of politics. With such a diverse and complex challenge before us, it is difficult to imagine that any one entity could have the solution that ails us nationally and globally. However, you are where hope of our nation and the world gets translated. You are the Global Wellness Summit and the Global Wellness Institute. I know the aggregated solution is contained in each and every one of you and the diverse intellectual property you bring to our collective Global Wellness Summit table for scientific crowdsourcing of the global society wellness needs. The aforementioned events of our time cry out for action and leadership at this point. No more discussion. We must act because our world is in peril. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? As we used to say in Special Forces when I was a young soldier, the only easy day was yesterday. And if this were easy, everyone would be doing it. Thank you all for your commitment to global wellness. Thank you, Susie Ellis, for your vision, commitment, and leadership of global wellness for such a long time. Thank you, Global Wellness Institute, for eloquently defining our global wellness space. And last but not least, thank you, Nancy Davis, who I lovingly call my Command Sergeant Major, who is the adult supervisor for all of us at GWS and GWI. Thank you. Love you all. Thank you.